Good morning, it's Monday the 24th of January and welcome to Atlantic Capital Markets roundup of the coming week's economic highlights. As always, we'll start with a quick summary of the key macro data points coming up this week in the world's markets, and we'll then take a look in more detail at some of the bigger stories straight afterwards. So let's get straight to it. So let's take a look at the economic numbers being issued this week, and starting today we'll hear the latest manufacturing and services PMIs from the UK, the EU and the US, and we'll be discussing the impact of these specifically in the UK in a moment. On Tuesday we'll hear how inflation's faring in Australia, the state of public debt in the UK with the release of the latest PSBR figures, and the German IFO business climate and the US consumer confidence numbers. It's a big day in the US on Wednesday when we'll hear the Fed's latest interest rate decision, and that's something we'll discuss in a moment. Also, just over the border, Canada will also be making their announcement too. Thursday will tell us if Q4 has been a productive month or not in the US, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. And also, we'll hear the latest GfK consumer confidence numbers, US durable goods and the jobless claims also in the US. And Friday, it's the turn of Germany to let us know how their GDP is faring. Also, we'll hear the latest EU consumer confidence figures, the US core PCE, and finally the US Michigan confidence numbers. And the companies that we'll hear updates from this week are as follows. On Monday, we'll hear from Computer Center, and in the US, Halliburton and IBM. On Tuesday, Microsoft releases their second quarter earnings, and we'll take a look at this announcement in more detail straight after this. We'll also hear from American Express, General Electric and Johnson & Johnson. Wednesday brings us Tesla's fourth quarter results and of course their final numbers for the full year 2021, and we'll discuss this in more detail shortly. Wednesday also brings us Hargreaves, Fresnillo, Pets at Home, and over in the US, Boeing, Intel and Levi. Thursday brings us first quarter results from Apple, and we'll be talking about those also in a moment. Thursday also sees the release of figures from Diageo and Rank Group. And finally on Friday we'll hear from ITM Power. This week is a huge week with the return of central banks meetings, the Fed and the Bank of Canada. With inflation surging, will either bank be ready to start hiking interest rates? Earnings step up a gear with big tech set to release numbers after a terrible start to 2022, which has seen the Nasdaq drop 10% so far and head into correction territory. Politics remains a hot topic, particularly in the UK, with the inquiry into Boris Johnson's Partygate scandal potentially concluding. Will Boris Johnson manage to cling on to power? In Eastern Europe, tensions continue to mount as Russia builds forces along the Ukraine border. So, as world events move apace, let's take a look in more detail at some of this week's important stories. Monday brings us the latest manufacturing and service PMIs for, amongst other nations, the UK. Service sector activity saw a slowdown in December from 58.5 in November to 53.6 after the government brought in Plan B restrictions, brought in to restrict the spread of the new variant. The move to work from home hit city centre pubs and restaurants as well as retailers. However, with cases falling and restrictions now removed, any hit from the newest variant is expected to be contained and short-lived. Meanwhile, the manufacturing sector put in a solid performance across the final 3 months of the year, with new orders and employment subcomponents remaining strong at the end of the year. However, input prices are surging, and this will remain under the microscope in the January reading. So do keep an eye on the pound and of course the FTSE. The second largest company on Wall Street by market cap, Microsoft, is due to report Q2 results after the market close on Tuesday. Microsoft reported record revenues of $46.15 billion in Q4, thanks to a 51% rise in revenue from its Azure and Intelligent Cloud business. Consensus estimates point to earnings per share of $2.29 above $2.03 in the same period a year earlier, on revenues of $50.32 billion, ahead of the $43.08 billion recorded in 2021. Ahead of this week's report, Microsoft announced it will acquire video game giant Activision Blizzard for $68.7 billion, a deal which will make Microsoft the world's third largest gaming company by revenue. Despite the upbeat outlook for earnings, the share price has dropped around 10% since the start of the year, and a broad sell-off in tech stocks. At the last Fed meeting in December 2021, the Fed announced that it would speed up the pace at which it reins in its virus-era monthly bond purchases from $15 billion to $30 billion a month from January, meaning that the program will end in March. Now, the announcement came as the Fed adopted a more hawkish stance as CPI inflation shot up to 7% in December, a 40-year high. The US Central Bank also guided for 3 interest rate cuts in 2022 and a further 3 in 2023. Well, the minutes from the latest December meeting also revealed an in-depth discussion surrounding balance sheet reduction, potentially as soon as after the first rate hike. Now, this was a revelation which has unnerved the markets as investors feared the Fed might be looking to move too fast to normalise monetary policy. The discussion at this meeting is likely to tee up for a rate hike in March, so of course do keep an eye on the US dollar and US indices. Tesla is due to release Q4 earnings on Wednesday after the market close. Now, the EV maker recorded record deliveries in the final 3 months of 2021, above the 300,000 level. Now, the news indicates that Tesla is managing to navigate the global chip shortage better than most of its peers. Across 2021, Tesla delivered 936,172 vehicles, an 87% increase from the 499,550 delivered in 2020. Tesla aims for a 50% growth in deliveries each year ahead. Well, the broad expectation is that Tesla will guide for a 47% increase in 2022 to 1.375 million cars. However, this will only be possible should the new factories get up and running. Reports have surfaced that the cyber attack has been delayed. Whilst Tesla posted a record EPS of $1.67, revenue came in at $13.76 billion, a record, but did miss forecasts. Q4 EPS is still expected at $2.24. Apple is due to report Q1 results after the close on Thursday. And typically Apple's best quarter, given that it includes Black Friday and the holiday shopping period. Well, the results come after a rough start to 2022 for the tech giant. The share price has fallen 8.5% year to date, although it has outperformed the tech-heavy Nasdaq, which itself trades down 12% so far this year. Apple has suffered from supply and logistical headwinds, which lead to around $6 billion in lost revenue in Q4. Apple expects the chip shortage to continue plaguing the company in Q1, whilst lost revenue is expected to be worse than in fiscal Q4. Expectations are for revenue in Q2 to be guided for at $90.6 billion, and this would be a 1% year-on-year growth from Q2 2021's revenue of $89.6 billion. If supply constraints have eased or are expected to ease, then the outlook could be much brighter. Furthermore, product upgrades come in Q4 with the latest iPhone, iPads, watches and Macs being shipped from late November, which could bode well for Q1 numbers. And finally, Thursday also brings us the Q4 GDP update over in the US. Now, the US economy grew an upwardly revised 2.3% in Q3, which was a marked slowdown from 6.7% growth recorded in Q2. Expectations are for another boost to economic growth in the final quarter of the year, amidst a robust recovery in both manufacturing and service sector, and a continued improvement in the labour market. Consumer spending hit its highest level since March in October. However, the rise of virus cases in December could see growth slow slightly in the final month of the year, as consumer spending slowed amidst staff shortages and people staying at home to, of course, avoid contagion. So, of course, do keep an eye on the US dollar and US indices. So, those were the big stories in detail. Let's wrap up with a look at the dividends due this week. Well, it's a quiet week for the FTSE 100, but in the FTSE 250, we'll be hearing from Paragon Banking Group, Pennon Group, Schroder Oriental Income, and Banking Investment Trust. So, those were the highlights coming up this week. If you are a new viewer of our regular videos, why not click on that subscribe button just to make sure you don't miss our regular market updates, and just as importantly, our special market analysis videos as soon as they're released. And of course, if you are interested in the markets, as always, let me remind you about our very powerful app, which you can download from the App Store to your mobile phone. Why not check it out? So until next time, from all of us here at Atlantic Capital Markets, have yourself a great week.